Welcome back to Impact Pasadena. It's my pleasure to speak with Congresswoman Judy Chu. We've had an interesting conversation already talking about immigration, women's rights, and the fact that you are the very first Chinese American woman elected to the Congress, which is really an important milestone in our history. We were talking about Veterans Affairs, and I know that this has touched you personally, a service member that you are related to, and the fact that impelled you to do some important work on behalf of our service people. So if you don't mind sharing a moment with us about that incident.
Well, one terrible midnight in Afghanistan, 2 Marines pulled aside my nephew, Lance Corporal Marine Harry Liu, and they started punching him, kicking, torturing him. They made him dig a foxhole. They cut open a sandbag and poured it all over his face so that he couldn't breathe and was basically smothering. So this torture went on for 3.5 hours, and at the end of it, he crawled into the foxhole that they made him dig, and he took a gun and shot himself. So to me, it was clearly a case of military hazing, and I demanded that we have a hearing on military hazing. It was actually the first hearing on military hazing that had been held in Congress. But soon thereafter, there were other cases that came forth that were similar. Some were on racial grounds, some were on just because somebody was different.
Yeah.
Because maybe somebody was overweight, or another was considered to be weaker than the others.
Yeah.
But whatever the thing was, there is military hazing.
Absolutely.
But when we had that first hearing, I can tell you that the military did not admit that there was military hazing.
No.
They did not acknowledge that it even existed in the military. So thus began my multi-year effort to have an accounting of military hazing and to have something done about it. And so it took quite a bit of effort, because the military didn't want this to come out, really. At first they did self-reports. The self-reports, of course, were just useless. And then I was able to get a GAO study, which is a Government Accountability Office study.
Yeah.
And that was really good. They were very, very thorough, and they concluded that yes, there is no accounting of military hazing, that there has to be some way to monitor it, the incidents, the numbers, and that the data has to be kept from year to year. There has to be a policy on it, and then there has to be a means to address it. So then I was able to get something in the National Defense Authorization Act to address those issues, to implement those recommendations of the GAO.
Yeah.
And this year is the first year that we got the results. Interestingly enough, the branch of the service that came forth with the most detailed information was the Marines. They documented 293 cases of military hazing in detail, also what they did about it, all kinds of things. Now, that may make you think that the Marines engaged in more military hazing. What I say is that I give them a lot of credit, because they actually took this seriously, and they clearly are having some means to address it. Yeah. So our provision in this year's National Defense Authorization Act is to require all the branches of the military to have that same level of reporting and advocacy on the steps on what to do about hazing.
Yeah. Well, it shows how one person can make a difference, and it's true. Also, it shows what you mentioned earlier, which is it comes from the top, particularly in the military, if there's a command structure that takes it seriously. And I think this is true of the role of women in the military, too. There are things like that.
Yeah.
quickly story for me is that my dad was a West Point graduate, and he was hazed as a plebe, but he said that when he got to be an upperclassman, he would never haze, and I think he probably took some grief for it too. But that was something where even in the 40s, when he graduated in the middle of the war, people were still quite sensitive to this. I mean, some people like my dad were.
Yeah.
There are other people because there's no command purpose for this. There's no training purpose for it. It's just. And as you said, it's usually somebody who's the other in some way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the excuse that some people use for hazing is corrective training. This is their form of corrective training to make the person a better soldier.
Yeah.
But they take it upon themselves to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And also, it's not part of the process.
No,
It's not regulated. I mean,
right. Yeah.
Good for you on that. I know personally, I'm sure it was so important to you. We've talked a little bit about veterans. We've talked about our community college students. And I know one component for the students and for the veterans is finding jobs. And we're in a good economy in a sense. It seems to be benefiting the upper class more than the middle class and the working class folks, but particularly for our younger people and millennials, it's not necessarily translating, the good economy is not necessarily translating into good paying middle class jobs. And so I know one of the things that you've been working hard on is economic development, particularly in our area in the San Gabriel Valley, the small business centers and some of the other things. How is that going, and what do you see, what's your prognosis on how we're going to do economically? Because things go up and down too,
Well, what I always tell people is one of the best ways to find a job is to create your own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why knowing how to start a small business and getting the support for it is so important. So that's why I was so eager to bring a small business development center to the San Gabriel Valley. The small business development centers provide a business plan, help with financial aspects of the business, marketing, research. They will take you step by step, and guess what? It's all for free.
Yeah.
So you can just walk into this SBDC and get all that help. It is one of the most effective programs of the Small Business Administration. So I was able to get one at PCC, at Pasadena City College, and also at the University of La Verne. Both centers are doing very, very well.
So I'm a young person, I want to open a coffee shop. And so I can walk into the
SBDC.
SBDC. And they can give me some advice, but you always need some capital.
Yeah.
And I think you've done a little work on loans too, haven't you?
Actually, this has been my focus, getting access to capital.
Yeah.
So I have opened up basically the loan process. I was able to get a bill through that would allow businesses that have old real estate loans that were too expensive to be able to refinance them using the SBA process.
Okay.
I have another bill that did pass out of the House but has still yet to pass out of the Senate on allowing banks to be able to put more money into something called Small Business Investment Center, which is for high growth startups. So those kind of more risky kinds of businesses can get the money they need, and this is how Tesla and Apple first started.
Sure.
And now I have a bill that I'm putting forth, which is for the Community Advantage loans, which are loans specifically for those underserved populations, like veterans, like minorities, women, and these are loans that may make the criteria for a loan less onerous, and yet still provide valuable help.
Yeah. One of the hardest things I find in at PCC or elsewhere is getting the word out that there are these programs that are available for kids or for young people or anybody. And many of them are federal or state programs or even private, and getting people to know, which is, the challenge that we face is having counselors who can tell people, by the way, there are these grants that you could get and things like that. And if you're a first generation college student, for example, or a veteran just coming back, you may not necessarily know about all these things that are available, which is, to me, one of the pities of the Trump administration, because they seem to be cutting back on any kind of outreach that you could do for these important services.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, I take it you agree with me. So you don't have to. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the environment. And I know you were pivotal in the San Gabriel Mountains. Our beautiful mountains that I look out at every day and think, gosh, I'm so happy to live in California. But they're a natural resource that we have to protect, and you've done a lot to do that. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh my goodness, this is such a wonderful thing. The San Gabriel Mountains are the jewel of LA County, and you and I get the pleasure of looking up there and seeing these gorgeous mountains. Think about it. It's only within a 90-minute ride for anybody in LA County to go up there and enjoy nature in such a wonderful way. But for years, the San Gabriel Mountains were neglected. There were not enough resources up there. It was just complete chaos. So that's why there has been a multi-year effort to get those resources. First, to make it a national recreation area, but when that appeared to be stuck, I was able to get President Obama to declare it a national monument. And since then, we have been able to get so many resources up there. First of all, millions of dollars to help with the infrastructure, but also to get a monument coordinator, volunteer coordinator, to have field deputies who are out there. We've been able to clean up all kinds of graffiti and clean up the trash. It has been really wonderful. But we don't want to stop there. I actually have a bill for a national recreation area, which would take in those areas outside of the monument boundaries, and also the San Gabriel River and the Arroyo Seco area. If we are able to have this national recreation area, then we can get even more resources, because then you become a line item in the budget. And the exciting thing too is that Senator Kamala Harris is the sponsor of the bill on the Senate side.
Okay. Well, I have to talk about the fires a little bit, because from a political point of view, the president has sort of attacked our state for not, I don't know what he thinks we should be doing about fires. It's climate change, which he doesn't acknowledge, but at least in part. And then there's the PG&E component of this. Now, what role does the federal government have to play here? I know it's come down a lot on the state and Governor Newsom, but what's the role of Congress, for example, or the administration in this terrible problem that we keep seeing?
Well, we certainly can extend more aid to the people who are recovering from fires. And that's in fact what we've been doing in terms of disaster aid. Actually, there's a bill that we have to make sure that when a disaster is declared on the state level, that the victims can get aid immediately, because right now it's such that the federal government has to call it before they can get the aid, but the federal government lags behind the state many times. So there are those kinds of things that we can do, and of course there needs to be money to ensure that these forests are maintained properly. But President Trump is way off the mark. He keeps on saying, oh, these forests, they are California's fault because they haven't cleared the forests. But in reality, the fires that we've seen are brush fires. They're not forest fires. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's so many areas it seems like that California has to fight back, in many cases successfully, against some of these federal initiatives that are shutting down things that we as California citizens want, need, willing to pay for, and the government is trying to stop us from kind of taking care of ourselves. I can't think of another way to put it.
Well, Governor Brown,
Yeah.
Jerry Brown,
Yeah.
was just in Congress testifying about California's emission standards, because we have been in the forefront all this time. We have had a higher level of requirements for emission standards for decades, and it's required us to have a waiver from the federal government so that we could go even higher.
Sure.
And that waiver has been granted time and time again, never denied until now.
And it seems that the auto companies are basically supportive of it, and they've made money by doing more clean vehicles. So it's
Exactly.
like so many things we see from Washington now and from the Trump administration specifically, it's counterintuitive.
Well, I have to really admire those companies that came into an agreement. There were four auto manufacturers that made an agreement with California to have these clean car standards and to have basically more clean cars and increase the clean car goal.
Well, it's smart business too, because you've got overseas markets that have that want these kind of vehicles. So we just shake our heads. I'm afraid. My profession is I'm a writer and a screenwriter, and one of the things that I've been concerned about, and I know you've worked on, is the intellectual property rights that we have as working in the entertainment industry, and many of us depend on the copyrights of the other things that we own, our intellectual property that we created. And I know you were the founder of the Creative Rights Caucus in the House. What are they doing, and what are some of the issues there?
Well, I founded this caucus because of people like you.
Yeah.
We have so many, especially in this area, who are writers and creators, but actually also so many people who are behind the scenes.
That's right.
They are the makeup technicians, the people doing the lighting and so forth. So this is an industry that supports so many jobs, especially here in Southern California.
And it's one of our major exports around the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, who doesn't want an American film, song, movie? So it was so important for me to help protect these works of art, but piracy was getting to an enormous level, and there was a Stop Online Piracy Act, which would have addressed it. But then because of fears that were put forth, but were unfounded fears, it was stopped. Yeah. That's when I said, hey, the story of the creators and all the jobs that this industry supports, that has to get out there.
Well, thank you for that. I personally.
Well, thank you, because we've done these incredible briefings on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
We've had the writers of Spotlight, that film
Sure.
out there, the whole creative team. Actually, just last week, I hosted a briefing for the creative team of Crazy Rich Asians.
Yeah.
And it was so fascinating to see how they put that together.
Sure.
So that has created so much more support for the creative industry. So we've been able to pass bills like, for instance, we just passed a bill out of the House, the Small Claims Court bill, because the photographers and those with smaller claims who see their photographs pirated all the time, they can't spend money going to federal court trying to challenge these things.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I was so frustrated because I wrote some TV shows that were shown in Russia. I know they were. And people would come and they say, oh, I know your show from back in where I lived there. And I said, yeah, I never got a penny.
Oh.
I never got a penny. And I don't know that the studios did either, but in any case, we put our blood, sweat, and tears into these works that that we do, and to have them ripped off basically, internationally and online too. So so it's a continual fight. I mean, I know that the internet is so complicated and so diverse, so out there. There are many issues that we're going to have to face that are tough. I want to talk about politics a little bit because I'm always interested in that, and I know you are to some degree too. So in California, there were at least 7, at least in our area, congressional seats that really contributed to the House majority.
That's for sure.
And I know that I know you were on the stand a lot, supporting a lot of these candidates. But what I always point out to people is that just because you won one election doesn't mean you own the seat. Particularly in districts that are swing districts. So we have a number in California that in Southern California, in fact, that are new freshman congresspeople, and some of them have taken a leadership role. Unfortunately, we just had the resignation of one of your colleagues, which was an unfortunate, kind of a personal tragedy. I thought.
It was just so sad.
Yeah. So how's it looking for the 2020 elections in the House on the Democrat side?
So we are working hard to maintain the House. And we have to really be active on this because in at least 2 of the 7 races, the incumbents or the people that were defeated in those seats are coming back.
Yeah.
So in the case of Gil Cisneros, Young Kim is running against him again. In the case of TJ Cox, David Valadao is running again. So they are trying to get back in there, and the Republican Party kind of felt the sting, so they want to try to get it back. And that's why we're going to be as proactive as possible this time around. And it could be an even greater challenge because everybody's attention in the 2018 election was on the House races.
Yeah.
But now, in this coming year, everybody's attention will be spread out.
Yeah, and I think that it's often true that in midterm elections it's a referendum on the president, whereas in a presidential year it's a binary choice between those 2 candidates and people in the House. So the House elections are to some extent more localized, I suppose. And I know too that in the districts that were previously Republican, because the Pasadena district was historically for so many years a Republican-held district, a lock. Yeah. And Adam Schiff was the first Democrat to be elected here. So one of the most important things, I think, in politics is the infrastructure, the clubs, the activists, the grassroots people. And in some of these 7 districts that we're talking about, that didn't really exist so much on the Democrat side. The Republicans always had a hold, and that didn't go away. I mean, and I believe, I mean, I don't know what your information is, but it sounds to me like the Republicans have a lot of money and resources that they're going to put into some of these California races.
Yeah, so, I think they will.
Yeah. So are you optimistic?
Well, but we're ready. We're ready. And actually, the infrastructure is in place. Actually, the DCCC outraised the Republican counterparts tremendously in this last quarter. So we know we have a job to do, and we're doing it. And in the meanwhile, also, got to look at the Senate. We want to take back this Senate, but we need a net 4 in order to do that. And of course, we're looking at the White House.
What are the 4 seats that you think might go for the Democrats this time?
So the 2 that I think are the highest on the list are Arizona and Colorado. Mark Kelly's running a really good race and has raised a ton of money and also has kind of captured the people's imagination in Arizona. And then Hickenlooper is running against Cory Gardner in Colorado. So there's also Susan Collins' seat in Maine. There's Joni Ernst in Iowa. There's the Georgia seat. So those are kind of maybes. And also we need to hang on to the Doug Jones seat, which could be a challenge.
That could be a challenge.
Yeah.
Also, people are talking about Tillis in North Carolina, too.
Oh, that's right.
That
yeah.
it might be,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, now we're looking into a presidential year, and it's probably crazier than usual. On the Democrat side, as you know, we have so many candidates, and I like that. I think that's probably the way Democratic Party politics work. You have a lot of people, you have a lot of discussion, you have a lot of, I wouldn't expect that you've picked, you're like the rest of us, you haven't picked a favorite yet.
No.
We'll see how it plays out. I think, though, looking at it, what is the sort of strategy that we'll be looking at too? Because I know for most Democrats, it's really about defeating Trump and taking back the White House, because that's going to be important to the future of our country. What's our strategy for those of us who would like to see that happen?
Well, one thing I can say about this process is that nobody could say we're not being democratic and fair in terms of everybody having a voice. I mean, for goodness sake, we had 20 candidates up there, in the debates. Everybody had a fair chance.
Exactly.
The criteria for being in those were set out very clearly. And even though it seems like a lot of candidates, I think it was important for people's voices to come out. And certainly nobody could say it was, something that was pushed by the superstructure,
right.
like in 2016, some were really saying that. No, that's not the case this time around. But I do have to say, once we choose that candidate, we all have to be behind that candidate. That's the main twist and turn that we must have.
I don't see a lot of cracks in that. I think that even though we have disagreements on policy, we also want to see what we can do realistically in terms of these important issues. And we've got a lot of rebuilding of the trust in our country and building bridges here. And so it's so important that we can't get bogged down in intra-party. This is the time for us to have the debates and the discussions.
Exactly.
The other thing, too, I always say to my friends is, I said, the famous Will Rogers quote, which, as you know, is, I don't belong to any organized party, I'm a Democrat. and that's the beauty, I think, of our party. We are very democratic as well as being Democrats.
Exactly.
So that's my soapbox, and I'm sure it's yours occasionally too. I have to say that off camera we were talking about the long commute that you have from Washington to California, and if I can just betray a secret, your secret is Netflix and watching some of the great shows on television, which probably half the people who are watching experience that. So I'm glad that you have a comfortable and entertaining trip, even though it's a long way to come.
Well, I have 10 hours each week, because it's 5 each way. And some think it's a long commute, but because I binge watch, it actually seems very short.
Well, that's great. And I'm so glad you're here to talk to us. It's a pleasure to have you, Judy.
Thank you so much.
Congresswoman Judy Chu. Thank you.